I'm a nurse and run our family's assisted living, and recently we had some strange things happen in our care home. I understand with caring for the elderly that sometimes strange things occur, and doing this for almost a decade. Recently, I had a resident that started to decline at the age of 93. One night, after helping her get into bed, she asked me if Bernie, her husband, who died 10 years before, knew where she was. I reassured her that he did. It caught me off guard, since her mind was intact and she was not forgetful. A week went by, and again, I assisted the woman into bed. She says to me, "I hear Bernie in the hallway. Can you tell him that I'm in here?" I told her to call for him and he would come in. She refused and asked me to. So I went out to the empty hallway and said, "Bernie, E is in here if you would like to visit with her." As a nurse, sometimes you do things out of the better judgment for yourself, as long as it helps your patient. Later that night, I heard the elderly lady talking to no one quietly. I've had some odd things happen in my personal life through the years since childhood, but that is another story. I was once told by an elder Japanese woman not to talk to the dead or invite them into my home. Another week goes by, and my resident took a drastic turn for the worst by refusing to eat or drinking fluids. After a week's stay in the hospital, she returned on comfort cares and hospice. The end was near, and we knew it. However, while she was in the hospital, I received a frantic call from one of her nursing assistants asking if I would please come back to work because she was really scared. When I got to work, all the lights in the house were on, and she was sitting on the couch with her back up against the wall. When I asked what was wrong, she told me wide-eyed and pale that she had seen a mist down at the end of the hallway and was hearing weird popping noises coming from the residence room that was in the hospital. After checking the entire house and silently saying the Lord's Prayer, the house felt calm. Eve spent her last days being pampered and showed care and compassion from staff and family. Many of the staff came in on our days off to sit with her, including myself. The last couple days of her life, she was sedated for pain and hallucinations. When no one was in her room and she didn't know we were checking in on her, she was reaching up towards the ceiling and mumbling. The day before she died, we had XM music playing on our TV. A couple of the nursing assistants were performing for their evening cares when the TV changed to CNN for 30 seconds and turned back to the music by itself. The TV remote was on top of the TV. Since our favorite lady passed away, things have stopped for the most part. My mother passed away June 5th, 2007. Me and my husband were in New Jersey at the time, waiting to get unloaded. We drove an 18-wheeler for a living. My sister had called me the day before and told me that my mom was in a coma, and the home health care people said she only had about 24 hours to live and that I needed to come home. So I called our dispatcher and said we needed to be routed back to the Chattanooga terminal so that I could see my mom before she passed. He said no problem. After you and your husband have put tires on, go pick up that load and head for Chattanooga. Well, while they were putting tires on our trailer, we decided to get some sleep. The cell phone rang, and it was my sister. She told me that Mom had come out of it. It was sitting up and laughing and talking to everybody, and that she was okay. So I called my dispatcher and said we don't have to go home. We can do one more load out here. So it was late that night when they finally got the tires on the trailer, and we decided to just stay there in the parking lot till morning so we could get some much needed sleep. We get up that morning and pull out. As we're heading down the highway, my cell rings, and it's my sister. She's crying. She tells me that Mom passed away that morning early. So to make it a little shorter, our dispatcher gets us home 36 hours later. Now at this time, we are at my mother's house, and she has already been picked up by the funeral home before we got there. Later that day, my husband's cell phone rings while we are nowhere near it to answer it. So when we do pick it up to see if our dispatcher has called, it shows we have one voicemail and no number. So my husband listens to the voicemail, and it's my mother, the day after she died. The message said, "Connie, this is your mother. Call me." We decided to check if it was a delayed message, but it wasn't. I even took it to the cell phone company, and they said it was June 6th at 1:25 in the afternoon. My mom died June 5th, 2007, at the times between 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. It has really bothered me that we missed the call, even though she was already dead. She might have been trying to say goodbye to us. A few nights ago, a friend and I took a drive up Angeles Crest Highway. It was a clear night and wasn't too cold. As we entered the parking lot, we noticed there were no other cars there. As I made a U-turn in the lot to face the small building, there, we saw a man walking. What got my attention was the fact that my headlights shined bright on the building, yet we only saw the person from the waist down. The rest of his body was a shadow. The man was walking around as if he were looking for something. It appeared he had a flashlight in his hand, the way he was moving, but there was no light coming from it. The closer we got to him, the smaller the image got. When I shined my brights on him, it looked like he went down a small hallway. Even then, we could not see his upper body. We went back the next day to see if we could find anything. One thing we did notice was the hall we saw the figure walk through was now a wall. Not a wall that was just put up, but one that looked like it was part of the structure since it was built. 3 separate spirits are said to walk the halls of the soon-to-be abandoned Middle Tennessee Medical Hospital in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, as a new, more modern hospital is being built right across the city. In the older section of the 3rd floor, one room is said to be haunted by the ghost of a mental patient who jumped out of a window in the 1960s in the psychiatric ward. 30 years later, in that section, administrative offices were constructed, and employees reported hearing running down the hall of someone with bare feet, and a light outside the room where the man was said to have jumped turns on and off periodically on some nights. The switch that turns that light on can be found only inside the room, which was not even in use at the time. When the lights were checked by maintenance, they seemed fine. Later, some orderlies enjoying lunch on that same floor reported seeing an IV stem being rolled up the same hallway. They left their food there and didn't return. In what was the pediatric area, the ghost of a red-haired girl in her early teens in a white hospital gown has been spotted at one point by a nurse who also had long dark red hair when the room was used for pharmaceutical storage. She claimed to see the spectral image of the girl staring at her Through the glass observation window of the room, the nurse was also a redhead. Finally, the third spirit has been chronicled by the hospital's own sad history and has been spotted in a newer section. A young nurse who had just started was leaving for the night to go out with friends. As she hurried down the stairwell, she dropped her purse over the guardrail, a lunge too far, and fell down the center of the stairwell, landing on her head. She died 3 days later due to massive brain trauma. Ironically, one of the hospital's employees who had the task of cleaning up the bloodstains was the son of the woman who had seen the red-haired girl's ghost, as her family worked in the hospital. It is sad that sometimes you can see the girl repeat her fatal fall. I have many stories to share with you, but I'm going to start at the beginning. I grew up in Lawrence Harbor, New Jersey. From the time I was a very young child, I knew that something was not right in our house. Our house was the last house on a dead-end street that faced the marsh. In the winter, you could see Highway 35. The surrounding woods were equally as disturbing. I was the only girl in our neighborhood. All my friends were guys. They were like brothers to me. I was a tough kid, and I did not scare easily. However, being alone in our house and going to sleep at night frightened me to death. My father died when I was a baby, and it was just my mother, brother, and myself. There was quite a difference in age between my brother and I. For years, I kept my experiences to myself because I thought it was my imagination, and I also thought that if I told my mother and brother, that they would think I was crazy too. It took me a long time to realize that I wasn't crazy. It was not my imagination, and the hard part was that I was a gifted child whose family could not relate to me on that particular level. These are my experiences while I lived there. My mother and father bought the house in 1962, and I was born in 1963. We owned the house right up until 2005. To this day, the events are burned into my memory. From the time I was about 5 years old, there hardly was a time that the house was at peace. I would lay awake in bed at night and watch orbs dance across the walls and ceiling. Then, I could feel someone sit on the corner of my bed. It was not a faint feeling either. In retrospect, as an adult, you could actually see the corner of the bed being pressed down. My heart would pound in my chest so loudly that I couldn't hear anyone else, and I could feel every hair stand up on my entire body. I would pull the covers and pillows over me in such a way that only my eyes and nose would stick out, even in the summer with no air conditioning. Shadows were commonplace everywhere in the house. You could smell flowers in the middle of the winter as well. Then, just as I would start to fall asleep, I would be jolted awake because something pulled the covers of me so violently that they were on the floor at the foot of the bed. That would send me screaming out of my room to my mother. There wasn't a time that you didn't feel as though you were being watched, or that you didn't feel that something was following you from room to room. If you came home and put your car keys down, turn your back for 2 seconds, they were gone, and then after searching the entire house, they would suddenly reappear where you originally put them in the first place, and you were the only one home the entire time. When I was in high school, I would come home and shower because I played sports. I always locked the bathroom door. Every time I would pull the curtain back when I was finished, the door would be wide open. Once again, no one was home, and our interior doors had no keys. Until now, I've been very vague with you about my experiences, But now I will tell you in detail my most frightening experience. I was engaged to Mitch. We were just both out of high school. My mom was out, and so was my brother. Mitch and I decided to go to my house, watch TV, and eat some pizza. From the time we entered the house, I could feel that something was really wrong, really out of sync. The air seemed electrically charged. It was as though us being there had interrupted some unseen gathering. I ignored it, even though I was goose flesh from head to toe. Even with all the lights on, my mother's house always seemed dark. Mitch was sitting in the room watching television, and I went into the kitchen to heat some frozen pizza. We were having a conversation as I did so. My back was to the living room as we were talking, and I was placing the pizza on the baking sheet. I heard what I thought was Mitch leave the living room and walk into the kitchen. I became aware that he was standing directly behind me as I was still talking. I turned around to ask him something, but to my shock, it was not Mitch standing there. I felt all the blood drain from my face. My knees went to jello, and I gasped and screamed at the same time. Standing face to face with me was a huge black solid apparition. I could make out a head and shoulders, but the rest became more see-through as it went towards the knees and feet area. It felt like slow motion. I think that when I turned around and screamed, I scared it as much as it scared me. As I stood there screaming, the black figure literally whooshed through the kitchen wall. Mitch ran into the kitchen. I was shaking and white as a ghost. It took me a while to collect myself. I shut the oven off, and we left and went to the local pizza place, where I told them what happened. We didn't spend much time at my mother's house after that. This is just one story out of countless stories that I would be glad to share with you. I'm now 46 years old. My entire life has been one foot in this world and the other in the spirit world. Years ago, I'd contacted Sylvia Brown, who told me that my mother's house had many spirits in it, but two stood out. There's the ghost of a baby and its mother. She also said that I was a medium and a psychic, and she was right. This is what I now do. I'm no longer afraid. It gives me pleasure to be able to connect with grieving spirits, with their departed loved ones. I consider this wonderful gift that I will not trade for anything. Thank you for listening. All of my life I had reoccurring experiences of the paranormal, starting at age 7, as far as I can remember, when my father died. I used to believe the experiences were dreams or imagination until recently. I was telling my fiancé of my experiences, voices, mists, noises, marks on my body, being touched, shirt tugged on, hair pulled, etc. His suggestion was that maybe I am a sensitive. So, I started thinking about this possibility and decided to explore it further. My fiancé and I previously tried going to paranormal meetings, which would go on ghost hunts. There was one in particular that appealed to me, and we signed up. The building the group was going to was in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, at an old building that was previously the Elka Club, built in 1914. This information was given to us by the leader of the hunt. When we arrived, we went into a room to get the speech about which rooms to be careful of. They would be marked by the yellow tape. Nothing else was told to us about the history of this building. But as I stood there, a name entered my mind, and it kept repeating itself. Sarah, 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 over and over again. Well, as the group entered the basement, we divided into small groups of 2 or 3. My fiancé and I were in a small room in the back, and I felt nothing, so we decided to head out into the main part of the basement. And just as we stepped out of the room, a man that was on tour with us, who has been there before, said, "Sarah, if you are here with us, give us a sign." I was flabbergasted. I looked at my fiancé and explained the utter shock on my face, and we continued in to other parts of the area. I had entered a room just off the entrance of the basement and instantly was bombarded with intense sadness, so much so that I got tears in my eyes. I informed the group leader, and they took pictures around me, but by this time, I already knew that what they were searching for in the building wasn't correct. I knew that what I was feeling was the past, and the child Sarah intended on proving just that to me. She, in what I would call it, attached herself to me. She started flashing images in my mind about what the building was before the Elks had been built there. It was her home. It was a beautiful Victorian with a large porch, parlors, a library, you name it, she showed me. She told me that she was sad because of the remodeling that was about to happen in the building. She got her point across by telling me certain rooms did not belong. I also picked up a persistent man in a room on the first floor. I was flashed an image of a podium and people sitting and listening intently to this man. In the ballroom, I was given images of people dancing, only black shadows of such. And at last, the third floor, I approached the end of the main hall and was shoved by something not seen. I took a moment and continued on into a grand circular room with benches attached to the circular walls, and had the feeling of being watched. And I kept saying, "This feels like judge and jury." It was like you were being persecuted, watched, and the spirits were getting angry. So I wanted to step out of the room for a moment, and I took a step forward towards the door and received a sharp blow to my middle back on the left-hand side. I went out of the room and was telling the group about the incident and decided to give it another try. And as I entered, I again got another blow to the right side of my back. At that point, I wanted out of there for good, so the group agreed to leave the third floor. And as I entered the hallway again, I got pushed in the same spot as the first time, which happened to be in front of a very large window. The interesting part was, I said before, I knew nothing of the place, but when we were leaving, I told the owner all the stuff Sarah had told me. I told her of the man in the room that in my mind, I'd seen the podium. I told of getting pushed and hit in the back. Well, she surprised me, not only, but many in the group as well. Come to find out that this is where Sarah's home was. The rooms I was seeing were the rooms in her home. The man at the podium would have been the black preacher that occupied that room after the Elk Club closed down. That night, I came home exhausted. I fell asleep and dreamt of Sarah. In the dream, she told me her last name, so I searched for her on the internet. I then found something more shocking. Not only did I find her, the year she was born, but I also found the names of her parents. Well, I'd spoken with someone that has been to the club and knows things about it, but they never knew her parents' names, which happened to be the same names I came across. And as far as the room on the third floor, The owner informed me that this room was the judging room for the Elk members, and where they would hold their remembrances to the dead brothers. The interesting thing was, the women were not allowed in this room, and there was also an EVP that picked up stating, "You are being judged." So needless to say, I'm no longer doubting my ability, and I'm more open to my experiences, which have been many since that night. Hey Phantom, so another video for you guys to like and share and subscribe if you haven't done any of that, but really, I really appreciate your viewership as usual. I'm going to keep this really short because I have to use the bathroom, and I know that's too much information, but I could always come back and re-record, but you know what? I'm just going to do it my way, because my way is the highway. Well, maybe not, but you guys know what I mean. Anyway, guys, seriously, just forget what I'm saying except for sharing this video. It really helps the channel grow as usual, and I know a lot of people say that, but you know, the algorithm will be kind to me, and I'm almost at 27K, and we're almost there together, so I would appreciate it if you actually did that. So, love you guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.